Copyright in these lectures is either owned by the ANU or a third party who has licensed the ANU to use it. Students may use the recording for personal study only. No lecture may be communicated online, copied or shared without the prior permission of the ANU.
Most of the lecture today is the last components on the informal financing. Then the next week, I usually could give back the project this week, but because this year we have even more students, more report, so it took much longer to read them, so it's going to take longer. So I will give you back the project next week, and then next week also do review of the material, so then that's about the finish of our class. So we're probably going to be finishing all the lecture today. Okay, so last week, basically this now last component is talking about the informal financing, but we started the smallest, the microfinancing, and then today we're going to looking at informal financing. Now the informal is the more general words, right? So even the microfinancing could be part of informal, but more conventional, the informal refers to not so small, actually should be decently large size, much larger than microfinance, but not through the banks. Right? So the lending are occurring not with a financial intermediation institution, but rather with maybe other individual people or other business, those people or those entity or companies who do not conventionally do financing as their major business. Okay, so that's the main idea. Or they could be some kind of financial institution, but they are outside of the sort of a bit maybe almost at the borderline of illegal. They are not permitted to have banking license, but they are doing financial intermediation business. So that's what the financing, informal financing refers to. Basically, the lending or the financing activity dealing with the non-standard banking, not standard banking, so through other institutions or economic agents, right? So this informal financing has been studied a lot, and people start to know about this, and know, of course, people have practiced it for a long time, right? And particularly, it attracts a lot of attention in the academics since in the past several decades. The emerging economy, like in Asia or some even Europe or Latin America, starts to grow fast and attract attention, right? And then previously, people always understanding how firm getting money. It's actually based on the US-UK model, where the firm always borrow from the banks or raise money through the market, right? In those emerging markets, like Latin America and in Asia, the firms actually they find the large components of the money of those firms not coming from bank or the market. And that's where people start understanding why those exist, right? Now, because of how they're coming to attract attention, for a long time people tend to believe those informal financing are just a second best because the banks are not available, right? So, for example, in China, there was a long time not an established banking system, and when you switch to allowing private firms to operate, there's not enough bank, right? And it's similar to Latin America, etc. So they think because the firms cannot get bank finance, that's why they get informal financing. This is possibly how part of it is true, right? But then part of this, they also assume because it's the second best, so therefore they must be inferior. Maybe because they have very high cost, they assume they have very high cost, and they are not efficient to support firm growth, right? Because it's the second best solution. But this assumption actually contradicts the reality, because in reality we see the emerging market actually grow very fast, right? And also a lot of firms that are growing fast are still getting informal financing. So this is that assumption is not actually, so the best is, or say this simple view of viewing informal financing is always inferior, is too simple, right? This is actually strictly be more elements of the informal financing we could learn. Right, so I'll introduce you this one of the paper we did. We actually did 2 papers. So I'll first tell you a serial model, so looking at how loan contracts are done, right? Looking at how loan contracts are done, and to study whether informal financing might actually have something engineering good, right? So this is actually a paper I did with my courses. And so the conventional, those bank loan financing contract, they basically assume that when I do what I have implemented that contract, my efforts or my decision is to maximize my utility or the payoff in this particular transaction, right? And this assumption could have problem some. Because if you're dealing with business with someone for long term, you're actually concerned about, right, so your reputation or...
as a continuously operating.
Yes, so you make, because when you assume the person maximizes this one project only, you assume the business closed in one term, right, in one period. But in the reality is you keep doing business, right? You may keep doing business with your suppliers. You may keep doing business with your bank or whoever lends you the money. This makes an implicit interest that you concern about the other person, right? You want to make sure the other person is also reasonably happy enough through this transaction, right? And even if you don't concern about this other person happy enough, if this person is unhappy, you may spread a reputation of you are not very reasonable business people, then you may lose some other clients, right? So through this, we introduce that there must be an implicit interest. You care about the other party in the transaction, in the repeated game. And then your decision now, in addition to consider or maximize your own payoff, you want to put the other person's payoff into consideration as well, right? So then your eventual decision is to maximize this balance of your own payoff and also a reasonable payoff for the other person, right? So in our model, the key change we add in is to have this implicit interest into the decision making, right? So then in our form of this contract, the utility function of the borrower, you'll consider the payoff of the project you invested and the payoff to the lender. And also possibly if the default, because that consider how much risk and how much efforts he's going to work on the project, right? Is there any penalty? Or is, the penalty large or high or low? That will all come into the borrower's consideration. And then the lender will consider the payoff of the loan, the interest that he charges, right? And also how much after he charges interest, how much left for the borrower, right? And his decision of, how costly for him to monitor. And if the person default, if the borrower default, does it worth him to penalize the borrower, right? Is there a cost to exercise penalty, or if this penalty is going to bring him any benefits, right? So, for example, the penalty is, can you chase after the person's other assets, right? Is there a way for you to track him down, or if you want to get him more salvage value, how much cost you may have to spend, right? So these are their consideration in their decision now. So what they can influence, like we always understand, you can only decide your own action, right? You enter the contract in the way trying to influence the other to do the best. But in reality, what you can decide is your own action, right? So the borrower's action is to decide, what project to choose, or once the project is chosen, then what is the level of the efforts he worked hard on this project, right? So that there is a payoff to the project and pay off the interest, etc. While the lender's decision is the interest rate. What is the price of the loan that the lender want to charge, right? And he will consider of, if I charge this high interest rate, would it motivate that person to work harder or less harder, right? Okay, so then to make it simple, this is Nash equilibrium you guys always have understand, right? When they make their decision, they already consider, if I do this, I do this, the other person will do what? And I also know the other person will know I'm going to do this, if assuming they're all rational people, right? So that's the basic model setting up. And then in this model, once we set up, we solve the model, then we compare three, because I don't want to show you guys the complicated this model of continuous, right? So I'm just going to show you. Once we solve the model, then we apply this to three special situations, because then that situation is you see it often in reality, and that can make you understand what actually this implicit interest will explain a lot of the phenomena, right? So we compare three forms of financing: standard banking, and informal financing with constructive altruism to arising from the social network or business network, or informal financing that has destructive penalty, right? So the first one, standard banking, very simple. The standard US, UK model of the bank doing lending to the business, right? And the bank don't have any implicit interest. They just maximize their own business, right? And once you default, they're trying to get their collateral back, right? They are not going to chase after you for your personal assets. They are not going to do any physical punishment to you at all, right? Everything is contract-based, legal, within a legal framework, right? Now, the second one, informal financing with constructive altruism or business relation, you can consider of, for example, in Asian countries, when you start a business, it's very common for people to borrow from their families and relatives, right? That's a social network. Another one is business network. This actually exists all around the world, which called trade credits, right? Trade credits is basically, for example, a supplier or what is a client, right? So if you are a company, and for your production, you need to buy material from another company who is your supplier, right? Your way of doing it, either you pay cash now and he delivers the material, or you can enter contract, he will deliver you the material first, and you can wait until you do your production, you sell your products, have proceeds, then pay the supplier. The second format will be a trade credits, right? And in this process, who is financing? The supplier is actually financing the producer now, right? He is giving the material in advance without asking for money, which is equivalent to as if he is providing a loan, right? So this is called trade credits. And this happens is because they have business relation, right? And why this business relation would make them care about each other? Think about, because the supplier is selling to the producer who is his client. What if the client went bankruptcy? The supplier lose a client, right? So in this setting, the supplier do have incentive to ensure that the producer can survive, right? Now, this later on I'm going to introduce this. Can get more complicated when it's monopoly market versus competitive market, right? So this is the informal financing, actually very common. So now the third form, informal financing with destructive penalty, which will be in a situation where the law or the contract are not respected. What does it mean? So we know when you enter a loan contract, right? So this is this project particular based, and if it works out well, the person pays the bank or the lender interest rate, right? If it's if the person wants bankruptcy, the business, you get whatever the collateral value, the lender gets the collateral value, right? And then I'm not sure why he's taking a photo. And then that's, you get the collateral value, but you can't chase after his personal assets, right? Now, if this is not being respected, or because the way the business or the contract are not written clearly to separate the business assets from personal assets, then it gives a possibility that the lender can chase after the borrower's personal assets, right? And the worst scenario would be those illegal loan sharks, right? They lend to you at a very high interest rate, and if you can't pay back, they chase after you, they might actually beat you up. Right? That would be the worst scenario. So but that happens when basically if there's no legal binding or the contract are not respected. So when we compare these three forms, this is what we find as the basic in equilibrium, how these three forms compares. First, in terms of interest rate, which is cost of the financing, we find that the construct type of informal, when you borrow from through your social network or through your business network, the interest rate is actually the lowest. And the bank is in the middle, while the destructive one is the highest. Right? Now, in terms of efforts, doesn't matter, you can have just very, they may chase after you to make you, maybe if you're personally threatened in those non-legal environment, or the implicit interest rate you care about the other person's payoff, both of these forms actually motivate the borrower who is the entrepreneur works much harder, right? And then when he works much harder, the project's outcome turns out better. But the payoff, so in the good, social network, business network, there's better outcome profits are shared by both the borrower and the lender, right? So both getting better off. But in the destructive ones, even though the project outcome get better, but the lender is getting most of the profits, right? Because he has more power to getting those profits. Now the banker in terms of producing the best outcome, the bank loan actually is the lowest, but the payoff to the lender or to the borrower, the hard-working entrepreneur, is still better than those non-legal environment, right? So basically, those non-legal environment like underground financing or loan sharks, entrepreneurs will not likely to go them because they have to work harder, but they're getting worse off in terms of payoff, right? The one who getting better off are the lender. Now, but the borrowing from family and the business network are actually overall giving a better results here, right? In terms of project outcome and the payoff to both the lender and the borrower. Now, so this is the equilibrium solution, right? Now, of course, when you get this is assuming the project size is the same, right? So this fits. So this model haven't changed the size of the project. Now, thinking about this better off is because they can give lower interest rate. But what if the project gets very big, right? And you need a large financing. Then this borrowing through the network is going to start to disappear, right? Because it's much harder for your family to be able to raise a large amount of money, right? Or the business, your suppliers are not going to be able to finance the whole project. So the benefits of this networking will start to disappear through the network a little bit, right? This exactly explains the pattern of why in those recent emerging markets, this informal financing is so popular, right? And it also explains why actually those firms can grow faster, right? Because their lower interest rates, the outcome of project is better. Everybody gets better off. The growth is fast. While once you go into the more developed countries, the project become very large compared to typical US firm size to a typical Chinese firm size, right? You see typical US firm size much larger. Then they start to rely on more the banks for the large ones. Now, more interesting, if we expand it even further, is nowadays crowdfunding, right? Now, the crowdfunding, somehow now he can raise not through bank, directly through certain network or whatever the platform, raise large amount. But what is the problem with this crowdfunding? There is no monitoring anymore, right? When you borrow from your friends or from your business network, the lender knows the borrower well, right? They can either monitoring through the social network, or they have know you very well, so they know your credibility. Or in the business situations, they have done business with you, and they may actually easier to have collateral from you, right? Now, this is what crowdfunding would be lacking. Of course, crowdfunding could require collateral as well, but then for each individual person who participates to finance that project, they have little influence to control that collateral, right? They would have to rely on the platform, for example, Lufax, to do the salvage for them. Now, because of those trouble, then the interest rate might actually increase again, right? Then lose that benefits. So that's, you see the dynamics of how the technology could overcome some of the disadvantage, but then bring you the disadvantage, right? Okay, so this is basically the solution would look like. Now go ahead.
In Australia, this firm size is really smaller
Mm-hmm.
compared with other countries. So why informal finance is not very popular?
Okay, yes, very good. So we're going to talk about it a little bit later, if you wait a little bit longer. Now thinking about now you understand it. So this implicit interest, this you caring about the borrower or the borrower care about the lender, is actually making the key important here of whether you want to give using this trade credits or not, for example, right? So what is the implication? From this, we can actually thinking about more phenomena in the reality. One prediction would be if did I use lender or borrower? Either one of them, I can write. Okay, so the firm with monopoly power are more likely to receive trade credits than giving trade credits. And why is that? If you are the monopoly power, let's using supplier and the supplier and the producer who needs material, right? Earlier I said the example was they deliver the goods first, then later on you pay the money. But sometimes you can also be the producer have to pay the money first, and then later on, then the supplier provides the material, right? So the trade credits can go on either way. Now, whether it's go this direction or the other direction, it depends on the monopoly power. Let's say using the example of if the supplier is a monopoly, basically the producer have to get this material from this supplier rather than from other people. Where the trade credits is going to go, the direction?
Going to the supplier.
Exactly, going to the supplier, right? Because now the supplier care less about this producer, but the producer care more about the supplier because this is the only supplier he can have. Right? But then on the other hand, so this will be the power, the trade credits will go to the supplier. Now, what if there are many suppliers, but then there is one or two very large producers? Basically, the producer can buy material from many. But this producer is an important customer for all those suppliers. Where does the trade credit is going to go? Actually, change the direction, right? The producer now has the power to get trade credits, right? So that's how the monopoly will play an important role in this direction. Now, the second is the constructive type into financing with implicit interest rate will be popular only in countries. It's going to rely on the countries with strong family value, strong personal trust, and also the community, a very tight community spirit. Right? So that's why you see this family borrowing or lending money to your friends or family are common in Asian countries, because these are the countries that has a lot of tight, family values and helping each other. I mean, maybe at least in older days, the modern, maybe it's changing, or the community being breaking down, right? So if you apply this to Australia, what you see is lacking. Right? So Australia has culture derived from UK. So in their mindset, working very like UK. Do you have contract? Is this contract in this way? What is legal boundary to this? Right? So they are much reluctant to say, I'm going to just personally trust you to do this. You guys, because of now the composition of the student changes so much. So you guys may not have the experience, but you probably would meet, sooner or later you'll meet a situation. We have a Western guy in the room, right? So what do you feel like if your friend's saying, my tuition is short this semester, can you lend me $10,000? In your culture, how it sounds like?
Well, I wouldn't do it. I think that's a bit weird.
It's weird. Okay, he is kind of to do it, but it's weird. How do the Chinese students think it's like? Probably more reasonable, you're thinking, right? Relatively more reasonable. I mean, in the older generation, Chinese were thinking even more reasonable. We sort of helping each other. He's now shorting. Maybe his dad is going to wire next month, right? So this is about some kind of tradition or culture that related influence how people doing things. And that is also possibly why US, UK is more, they want to rely on contract and legal boundary. While the Asians talks a lot about, are you caring about this community? Right. So this is, again, so this predicts why the usage of informal financing can be vary from country to country. Now, the bank financing is popular in competitive market or industry where the switching cost of supplier customer is low. Why is that? Like earlier we said, switching the customer and the supplier, the producer is the customer, right? The trade credits goes to the person with monopoly power, right? So if it's in a monopoly power, what I actually have to give the monopoly person to, if I'm in the competitive market, my supplier in monopoly, I have to give financing to the supplier. Therefore, me as a producer in a competitive market, what I have incentive to do, or what I have to do, I have to try to borrow money from the bank, right? Because I can't get from the supplier. The supplier. Because I'm in a competitive market, the supplier, it's very easy, or the supplier don't care so much about me because he can easily switch or keep the other clients or customers, right? So at the end, the firms in the competitive industry will have to go to the banks. Now, let me introduce more of these predictions. The distress type of financing with physical threat is a last resort, right? The firms wouldn't go there until they really run out of other sources. That's easy to understand. And the lending through family, relative, or business network, for example, I've made some example for in Japan will be also the Keiretsu or the Chambo in Korea, likely to be cheaper than usual banking lending. Right? Thinking of what we talked last week, say in a Keiretsu, there is a bank in the center, right? And the bank make loans to all those firms, and then the bank trying to keep all the firm alive, right? Ends up often a lot of firms maybe have to go bankruptcy, but the bank wants to keep them alive. Why? Because in that Keiretsu setting, now the bank cares about those member banks, right? And as a result, what we talk about is implicit. When you care about the borrower, your interest rate is going to go down, right? So therefore, if you borrow from your Keiretsu bank, central bank, you're likely to get a lower interest rate than the usual standard banks, right? And this, again, supports why those business networks in Korea and Japan, those economy could growing fast as well. Now, financing with implicit interest improve firm performance more than bank financing because it motivates the person working hard, right? The financing with physical threats will motivate to work hard, but it's actually going to deteriorate firm performance in the sense because the lender is getting most of the profits out of the firm, right? Now, financing with implicit interest are more willing to negotiate than bank financing in case of delinquency or default, right? Because in case you're slowing, for the bank, if they don't care about you, they just want to get the interest and they want to step in, take your collateral at an early stage so they get more value, right? But if you are the member bank or the business or you care about the lender, then you are more willing to help the lender to go through this difficult period, right? So so these are all very practically. This will also says about why the Keiretsu Bank will keep all these zombie firms making themselves into zombie banks, right? This is exactly what this would. So these are the implications our model could predict, and they are actually very consistent with the phenomena in the world. Okay. And now, so the model, we are the first one to do this model, have this general prediction of everything. But there is actually a large literature have to doing piece on those points before. Right? So for example, some of the papers showing the trade credits, it serves like a commitment device for making the relationship-specific investment. Right? So this, for example, the supply and the customer, right? So if the supplier is giving the trades to the clients, the customer, to the supplier, this is almost like a relationship investment, right? He helped this clients to grow, to produce, to grow bigger, and then secures for the future relationship they can have. Once the customer's firm grow bigger, the demand for this material gets large, then the supplier is also getting large business, right? So this is sort of giving that trade credits to help the customer grow is like a relationship investment for the supplier, right? And then there's also some papers showing the importance of network in verifying the customer's reliability in doing this deal, in the trade credits, right? And this is based on Vietnam data work. And then there's also papers showing the suppliers can be as a debtor, that who gives the financing, but also an insurance, right? Because in case the customer is going through this difficult or shocked or going through an unexpected risk or shock, right? And the supplier in the business will have more information about the customer situation than to decide whether this is the right time to bail out this customer, right? But if the customer is borrowing or the producer borrowing from the bank, would a bank have that incentive? The bank usually wouldn't do this, right? You go through, you are shocked by whatever the business risk unexpected. The bank just, if you go into bankruptcy, the bank will just take the car, that's all. Make sense? Right. Now, on the cost, right, so these are the trader credit usage. Then on the cost, they are, evidence is a bit more mixed. Many of these ones they're showing that some showing very costly and some showing that they are low cost. And some are showing the model predicted about the market power, right? So if the market power explains the small supply are squeezed by the large buyers, you're probably getting high costs, you have to offer, you either have to pay high costs or you even might have to offer the financing. But then some of the others. So it's more mixed, and the main reason of the mix is because of the power or whether who is in monopoly, right? And then the evidence on value contribution, how the results of it, right? So this is actually very interesting, right? For some papers, for example, the first one, they show that for the industry to grow, they actually find that the industries that have higher dependence on the trade credits grow faster than other industries. It makes perfect sense, right? The industry have dependence on trade credits would use trade credits that actually now connects the stream of the firms, right? The suppliers and the customer connects them. And this, like we said, this provides this mutual caring and the insurance, right? So that will protect them from many of those ad hoc risks or shocks, right? So maybe when the firm just going through some financial difficult time, they are more likely to pull through because of this codependence of the other business to help them go through this. Well, if the firm don't have those dependence and they are dealing with banks only, they do not have that insurance to protect them go through this, right? So this is a very clear. That's why those industries actually grow better, because they coming together as a group and trying to making this through. Well, if you don't have this, then the supplier and the customer don't care about each other. For the whole industry to go develop, you have to have both to grow well. Okay. Now, there are also some evidence showing those dependence of the trade credits. They can use it to sort of to hurt the entry or to hurt the entry, essentially. That can become bad because now they are in group existence. If they run inefficiently, they are insured by the other ones, so they are not running out, right? So they could become less efficient in certain situations. For example, the Japanese business group will be the best example, right? So they in certain situations, they become less efficient. Okay, so then I'm just going to go fast. So generally, you see the revamp, right? So in our paper, we had another empirical paper using the World Bank survey. Because the World Bank have done this survey with business around many countries, right? And what we find is the usage of informal financing is more popular in the smaller firm, younger firm, and less audited firms. Because those are the firms indeed harder to get in from the banks, and they might also rely on the informal network, information network. The construction financing are positively associated with firm growth, but the underground ones are not, the bottom. Right? The construction financing are very popular in the region where access to bank is extensive and the government business relationship are good. This become very interesting, right? So why the informal financing actually are become quite even more popular in where the access to bank become extensive. This comes off because of particular situation, and many of our evidence coming from China, is the lack of funds, right? If so, you understand that yes, I might need to bail out my customer now, but do I have the funding, right? If I don't have the funding, even though I have the incentive to bail out my customer, I not be able to do it. If the funding is lack of funding overall in the economy. But if this region, actually the banking industry is very developed, right? And I have the access to bank loan, right? This will provide the funding into this group. And then there's more funding through the bank loan coming into the group. Then within this group, more trade credits could happen. That makes sense now? That's why the informal financing could be even very popular and even maybe more in the regions where there's access to banks. Okay, so and then the both constructive bank financing are positive associated firm growth, but once you have both of them together, the interaction term will start declining. This is again on the typical declining return on the assets, right? Okay, so then in many countries, what we also find is that in many countries, this informal financing are played in many countries, and the culture in trust are very important. Let me just show directly results on the usage. So this will be a comparison of, so how this table is done. We're actually looking at 13 countries, right? And for each country, we're looking at the firms that are being surveyed, where their money come from. The question would directly ask them, for your last year's investment, how much percentage you borrowed from the bank, how much you borrowed from your family, friends, how much you borrowed from other, how much will your return earning, right? So we're looking at this particularly, we have this trade credits, interpersonal loans, and other informal loans, so these three components, right? And then we have all the other bank financing, equity financing, etc. So the last column is adding up all the informal financing. Then we compare looking at the 13 countries where China is. So in China, the total informal financing counts about 9.87, so near 10% of the firm's total financing. And compared to the other countries, the lowest is, where's the lowest? The lowest is Egypt, so only 4.25%. The highest is this country, Philippines, 20.89, right? And then there's many other, Indonesia, 19%, and also what's the other? This is the Pakistan, 12%. So where does China situate? Pretty much in the middle only, right? So this is in the middle. This is for the financing used for working capital. Working capital is like your daily operation, right? So it's more short term. So China there's a common used by many countries, and China just in the middle. Now, what about financing new investment? Financing new investment means you will have to, say, for example, purchase machinery or build your factory plant buildings, etc. So long term, much more long term, right? And so usually people argue this in those informal financing, because you borrow from your family friends, they cannot give you for such long term. They should be less, right? Let's looking at, so the same table was, similar table was constructed, and we're looking at in this one, actually China has 8.75%, only slightly less than the operational ones, right? And similar for the other countries. The highest now is Indonesia, 20.99%, and the Philippines is also still very high, 8.73%. So that's what I say two messages here, right? So the first, the informal financing actually can be used. Many firms are using the informal financing for long-term investments. And the second, again, China is pretty much it's just an average. It's not the highest. So there's many countries using this. Right. And then we're looking at cross-country, doing a regression to explain, their variation from country to country, right? So as we see here, there's even everybody using it, but there are variation, and then there are some countries we even didn't present here. Will be much less or even higher, right? And so we regress, say, you're looking at the country level, what explains this popularity of using this, right? We find the interpersonal, so there is the World Value Survey that gives us indicator of in each country how they measure the interpersonal trust, confidence in government, happiness of the citizen, etc. Right? So they basically find the interpersonal trust is very important to have those interpersonal loans, trade credits, etc. Right? And the confidence in government is less for the constructive informal financing, but actually still important for confidence in governance doesn't matter for trade credits, it's business, but for the interperson, it's still very important. And then on general, happiness. On general, it's almost in any form of the informal financing. It's when people are happy, the happy citizens tend to more willing to lend to each other. So at this time, we can conclude our Western classmates. He gives answer, he would do it to indicate he probably a much happy person in willing to trust other people. Right? Okay, so that's the regard. Now, in terms of value contribution means, how much you bring the firm growth, right? It's like after you take the interest out the firm's projects, how much you left in the firm for firm to grow, right? So it's a return on to the entrepreneurs. So we look at the constructive ones right? So basically what we find is those constructive ones, that means you borrow from your network or business network, but respect the legality in the contract, not are going to break people's leg because he couldn't pay. Those type are very good for the firm growth. And this is probably, many of you guys probably experience in your life as well, right? Maybe your parents or your parents' friends who actually start a small business, right, and borrowing from their family or friends, then it turns out the business is doing very well. Looking at the return of the rate, those relative smaller businesses are always paid better, if they survive, paid better than those big projects, because the return on the capital is decreasing in scale, right? Okay, so this is the value contribution. But the other ones, if you don't respect the legality contract, you're getting crazy or punishing other people, then don't. And those type of financing are actually not good for the firms. Now, crossing firms, looking at who using more, basically we looking who is growing better, right? So again, if you're using family loan, that basically is good for those non-state-owned firms, for smaller firms, or even for the smaller firms and the younger firms, right? This is just all consistent with the predictions. And the family loans versus the trade credits, so this is, again, consistent, right? The family loans are clear, it's positive, because it's a family member lending to the entrepreneur. But for the trade credits, it's not clear, because we earlier said, first, where the trade credits goes depends on the monopoly power, right? And also the cost of the trade credits, how much they charge interest, also depends on that monopoly power. That's why it could play good, it could be bad, and if you mix all the observation together, you can't find a clear-cut evidence. Right. And the importance of legality and the institutions, right? So you see this is, again, respect. So if you have high development private sector or legal accounting is better, those even informal financing can do better. Right. And then the complementary role of informal financing in the banking, as I explained, right? So if you have banking access, more funds coming into this business group or people community group, then there will be more trade grades or loans made between those, right? So basically what we do is looking at the percentage of firms that in the city can have access to bank loan, right? And then in the firms using bank loan versus and also using the constructive together, right? So basically you see they both, the loans, each of them, informal or the bank loan, can contribute to the growth, but when you have interacted them together because of decreasing scale, that starts to be, the law is less effective. Okay, actually I'm going very fast today. Any questions on the informal financing? Any questions? Good? Okay, so actually then maybe let's take a 20 minutes break, then we come back talking about the fintech, okay? Okay, let's continue. We're going to talk about the fintech, and mainly, I'm not going to introduce the technical part of the fintech at all, because there's no point to introduce you what is a blockchain like, because you guys are not a technical person, right? And this might be too fancy or too risky to engage in or encourage you guys to trade on Bitcoin anyway, right? So it's probably not the right time to do this. So and also since we are doing this fintech project, right? That introduced a lot of business model. So that's a lot of you guys probably do research already. So in this fintech, I'm just going to make it very short, just looking at the trend of the business, how fast it grows up, right? And give you some of the ratio that you could actually use to think about the market, competition potential, etc. And some of you, because I'm looking through the report, some of you actually use that as an indicator. This will give you some way of thinking of market. So it actually started from internet financing, right? So when the internet become possible, the financing through internet then starts possible, right? So the evolution of the financial development and regulation, and particularly in this one, I'm just talking about 5 things. One is online payment. The second is e-commerce, financial service, P2P lending, and internet insurance, right? Now, P2P lending will be probably including some of the crowdfunding as well. Now, all those, if you think about it, was in existence before this word fintech come into being, right? Because it's a slow evolution of the availability of the technology, the internet, right? And then it's at the same time, the financial industry is evolving, more demanding, right? And there's more demands for all kinds of people to raise money and all kinds of people to providing money. Right. So all these are over time changing, and this changing to become slowly developing into so large, it all starts forming like almost an independent, still not independent, like a large industry, right? This scale is big enough now attract the attention. People start to create these words of fintech. But you're thinking about it, it's basically a combination of financial service and internet technology, or maybe phone, whatever, this Wi-Fi technology, right? So that's basically the combination of it. Now, so online payment, for example, way before you guys know fintech, we know that banks have like online access, right? Online banking for a long time. And sometimes you could pay your phone bills or utility bills through your phone or internet, right? All this were happening before. And the P2P lending was also have been in existence more than a decade before the fintech become popular. So now looking at, I'm just gonna show you the trend of the growth recent. I haven't up because this is too much to update anyway. So this is from year 2005 to year 2015, how this has been going, right? So this is the bar, the orange bar, shows the number of people who have access to internet. This is on China, Chinese internet user and penetration rate. So in 2005, there's about 100 million, a bit more than 100 million people in China use internet. Does this sound reasonable, right? 100 million, that's almost like 1 or 10 out of every 100? No. 1 out of 100, no, less than that. We have about 1.3 billion people, right? I can't do the math. Was it 1% or 0.1%? 1%? If I do 100, if I 1%, I add another 100, here would be 10 billion. Oh, so it's about 10%. Oh, 10%? Yes, about a bit less than 10%, like 7% of people, right, in 2005. In 2015, grows to 700 million, which is about 20% of people. No, 50% of people, 50% of people, right? right? So that's happened over the 10 years, right? So this is, firstly, you do those fintech, you need the internet availability. The second, so that's like the base, right? The population, you can start with the whole population, then the population have access to internet. That's like your market size. The second is penetration rates. Basically, on this potential market, how many people are now the customer on this online, basically using the fintech technologies, right? So you had so in 2005, about 7% people use the internet. Among them, half of the people, oh no, actually not half, 10%. So it's this access. So 10% of them using fintech or online financial service, right? So that's become about 0.5% of the Chinese population. Right? And it grows over time by year 15%. The penetration, so not only the total internet user grows almost 5 times, more than 5 times, 7 times, right? Then the 7 times, and the penetration rates also raised to 50%. So that means now half of the internet users are using financial service. This probably also makes sense as well, right? Except it's too young or too old, but who are able to, or some of the one who use the internet but don't want to get it. So 50%, right? So in terms of total population, how much it is now? So this is about 0.5%, this is 0.5%, about a quarter. About a quarter of Chinese people are using online financial service. Right? So that's basically the trend. So now, if you continue going on, do you think it's going to grow this rate? Or it's more likely to go into slow down, flattening down? It's probably going to flatten down, right? It's like the early growth has happened and now it's going to stabilize. Now, the second one is looking at the total. So these are the market, like, right? And the second, we're looking at the company. The top 3 Chinese internet company, you guys all know, Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent, right? And so what is their total assets? So this is from year 2009 to year 15. So if you look at their total assets, this is grow about maybe 4% to here almost 120%. It's like 40 times over the 6 years period, right? So that's how fast those companies were growing, this amazing rate. And if you're looking at the 2015, their total assets, so the largest is Tencent, then Alibaba, then Baidu, right? And this is probably not Alibaba, slightly large, but probably still, right? And the Tencent at that time, 2009, was probably just on certain not too much, right? They have at that time had watched QQ, right? And then what happens, amazing happens, is actually around the year 13, 14, they introduced WeChat. That brings a huge growth for the Tencent, right? Because through the WeChat, they start to develop all kinds of applications using the WeChat. And the best name for Tencent for the WeChat right now is probably a super app, right? It's basically combine the online financial services that Alibaba can do, plus WhatsApp. This is a messaging thing that the Western are using, the chat thing, plus almost like a Facebook feature, right? So this is a real super app, and plus all kinds of online restaurant booking, car booking, all kinds of things that other company has been doing before using technology, right? So this is WeChat is probably the largest mega app that have existed so far. The whole society can survive there, seems like, right? And so then and Alibaba what's basically going on is, and it went public, right? Around that year 15, was it year 2015? I think end of year 2015 went to Alibaba, went public. And then all those companies, because Alibaba is listed on the US through this valuable interest entity. This is relevant to your finance people. So in most of the countries, not just China. They have, because of technology development, they have regulation on restricting the foreign ownership on their technology company. And this is more so for China company, right? Now, then if they limit the ownership of the technology company, how could Alibaba go list on US and sell shares to the US company? It would be violating the regulation, right? So they have to come upon a creative way to get around this regulation. So what they create is a separate entity called a valuable interest entity. So basically, Alibaba registered in China, but this valuable interest is probably registered in Bermuda or even US, outside of China. So being listed is not the Alibaba in China, but this separate entity called a valuable interest. But why the shareholders are willing to buy this other entity, which is linked to this Alibaba? So what they basically do is between the China registered Alibaba and this valuable interest of entity Alibaba doing a contract between them. This contract would specify that what is the liability of this Alibaba, this company, going to assume, what is the profit that has to be transferred to this company. Now understand? So in the end, what being listed is this new entity. It's not a technology company anymore. This whole entity's assets, liability, profit depends on this contract of this Alibaba, right? So through this, all business risk, etc., will go to the VIE, that's called VIE, and then shared by or owned by the shareholders. That's how they go around the technology regulations. Now, the problem of this VIE is going to be complicated because this is a new creation, right? And they are not clear how to regulate the VIE. And there's a lack of law. What if this, so who secures this contract is going to be implemented? And Alibaba do have a reputation of breaking this contract before with Yahoo when they were listing on Hong Kong. It was doing the same thing, and it was through Yahoo. And because this VIE also have the, how much shares Alibaba or Ma Yun owns or Yahoo owns, how much is this Alibaba, right? And then there is this VIE contract because this Alibaba, which Ma Yun had as a controlling say, basically breaks this contract. So this is, again, how if you say this contract is breaking down, then there's litigation of shareholder, how you chase, etc., right? And so the regulation has become more and more, people start to learn a lot of things. So the recent news you guys have heard is Ma Yun sold his shares in VIE. Instead, he registered another company, and another company, he fully owns that. And that company owns the control share of VIE now. Did it change anything? The controller didn't change anything. But he did that master through some regulation he is expecting. We don't know yet. Right? But then now you see, in the end, who really controls this? That's why Ma Yun the arrangement with Yahoo, he could break it. Because the contract is between this VIE and the original Alibaba. He is a controlling shareholder of both. Right? Okay, so there's a lot of governance issues that are not fully solved. This VIE is still a new phenomenon, a lot of. Right. Okay. Now, the third chart, I'm going to show the utilization rates for online or mobile financial application, right? So this is basically a survey going to ask you do you have this application and how percentage of people who are actually using it, right? So what shows is this is a percentage. In the orange one is 2014 and gray 2015. So it shows just 2 years change, right? So this is mobile trading that comes about less than 10%. So still less people trade stock online, but nowadays probably more, right? And online trading is slightly more. Mobile banking, doing financials, this is probably quite often because you use it to transfer money to make payment, right? Mobile banking, you do it on the phone. Online banking more often. Mobile payment and the online payment, those are much more, right? Because those are also usually involving relatively smaller amount as well. And then, for example, your WeChat of this on Hongbao would be counted as online, transfer, online payment, right? So that's why people use it more often. While the mobile stock trading, usually you involve more. People feel more safer to see more information, etc. But my guess is, I don't have the number, my guess is the online or mobile, particularly mobile online trading has increased a lot. And this is also related to the platform of those brokerage firm provide this app, right? Whether this app is designed much easier for use for trading. This also matters. Now, so the fourth and fifth chart is looking at e-commerce. Now, the e-commerce here has some number just predicted to IT, not the exact number yet. Right. So the bar shows the sales volume, basically how much sold online. So again, we know this online selling happens way before year 14, right? And it's just recent the fintech is starts to look at. And the gray line shows the sales growth. Now, the sales growth decline means the sales happens online, not all the sales decline online. This makes sense, right? The growth rate declines. Actually, if you think about all the industry or particular project or certain things, when they start, they grow very fast. Over time, the growth has to slow down, right? It's impossible for any industry to just keep growing because sooner or later, you're going to reach the max of that market capacity, right? When you start early growth fast, is because you start with very little base, right? A 10% of change is exactly 10%, is from 0 to 10%, a growth rate of huge, right? Another 10% from 10% to 20% is double. But then another 20% to 30%, 10% change is now only 50%, right? Because the base now becomes 20. Your base become large. The leftover room become much smaller. So your growth rate over time definitely is going to decline, right? And as a pattern, if you're looking at the life cycle of an industry, it will go very fast, then stable, then actually then declining because a new industry comes, replace this industry. Okay, so this now share in the total retail sales, this is going to increase, right? Basically means the total commercial sales more and more are moving to online. Think about how many things you guys buy from Taobao. You understand this, right? So the fifth graph is global e-tail sales. This is Chinese, and then looking at global. Let's look at each countries, right? So the dark orange one, is that orange or brown? I'm almost colorblind, is China, right? But this is the amount of sales. This is not surprising because of China's just large population. Right? This is a large population, just total if you look at total volume, it's surely going to large. The second one is US. Now, US is because it was a much early move. As online was eBay, it was there for a long, long time. And that's where Marvin was thinking about doing his initial directory thing. That's all from US, right? Then the UK, Germany, etc. So over the world, the growing is happening. But particularly if you're looking at where the growth comes from, it's mainly come from China, right? If you look at the trend of this and the trend of China, right? So there is some U.S. slow growth in other countries, but the majority growth comes from China. And this is by nature because of large population and the later movement of China on its online sales. Now this is, if actually, here I could talk a little bit more in terms of why the online sales. For example, did you guys know that eBay don't exist in China, right? There's a long story back there. And this is the funny thing is, eBay has become so popular in US, eBay didn't want to try to enter China. And if I remember correctly, Marvin was kind of involved. I don't know how the deal broke out, or Marvin maybe tried, it just failed. So eBay basically failed in China. They didn't enter. But if you're thinking of why eBay failed and then Taobao rise up, it says a lot about the consumption habits of people, right? The Taobao would be much harder to survive or arise in US, but eBay would. But Taobao would survive very well in China. What do you think? Now, the initial business model. How many guys know the initial business model of eBay? Yes, eBay. It's basically people to people. And there is an auction mechanism, right? The Chinese tend to not trust each other so much in terms of if I don't buy something from someone I didn't see, right? And then there's this auction thing. The Chinese probably don't have that too much enough to understand this auction mechanism or waiting time or etc. So it's very hard. But why Taobao can work? It's become a big platform. Everybody's thinking Taobao is so cool these days, right? It's almost fashion if you say you don't know Taobao, you're so outdated, right? Second, it's not P2P because I have this, I saw this. It become a professional. The producer is going to sell products here, right? So it's become a marketplace for mass production and sales. And a lot of this production starts with imitation goods, right? You're getting the imitation goods at a cheaper price. That's where how Taobao started. Even though nowadays they start a lot of companies trying to make their own brands there. Right? So that's a big difference. That's also the culture and the things matters a lot. What kind of business can be run in? Right. So this one. Now the third-party online payment, right? So this will be like you making payment. I think Hongbao would be one of them. You make a payment to your energy bill or insurance bill, the other people, etc. Right? So the volume goes up very fast. Again, the growth rate declines over time. Right? Not surprising. And so the amount, third-party amount, if you want to look at how much payment, the projection end of this year or year 19 goes to about 30 trillion. Right? That's how much was the GDP of China. Just let's do a comparison here. Then you will see how big this would be, how much transaction is happening. Online pay money is flowing on through the online or through the mobile. Just bear me 1 second. Let's say forecasted GDP of China in year 28. This is slow. There must be a forecast, right? Let's look at this trillion. So 13. The estimate is 13. And remember how much was the transaction here? 30. Projection, 26, so about twice, right? So it's about twice of the GDP, the money is flowing through the third party online payment. You know how big this is, right? Now, because that's the GDP is a total economic transaction measure, and this is a total transaction measure, right? So basically, it's like the turnover. The two of the turnover happens online. The Chinese third-party mobile payment, the amount is going to about almost also slightly less than online, but also large, right? So almost double of the GDP. So those are then the turnover GDP happens on mobile. Adding these two together, you have about 4 times of GDP. So number 4 of those turnover happens online or through mobile. So the actual transaction go down with the bank and or face-to-face cash transactions will be rest. But how much then matter is what is a benchmark of the turnover? Basically, what is the total transaction in the economy over GDP, right? So if you're thinking what is that concept is, if you have this $1,000, at the beginning of January, was received, say, through your Hongbao, and you deposit it into the bank, and this $1,000, the bank probably through making some loan to a company, right? That will be already 3 transactions. You receive Hongbao, you deposit to the bank makes a loan. Then the company getting the loan, purchase material another time, right? And the person receives the purchase made to do another business, or he used that to pay his kids' tuition, the 5 times, right? If that's right, then the tuition, the school may use that to pay whatever, a new building or something. That will be the 6th turnover, right? Just looking about just how this 1,000, how many times it's going to be get turnover in the economy throughout the year, right? Maybe 10 times, maybe 12, maybe 16. It depends on the activity of that country. Some country may be slightly higher, some lower. But we know 4 of those transactions will be happening through either online or through mobile payment. Right? Does this give you the sense now of these measurements? Right? So when the fintech people using the mobile service or internet more, this total turnover happens on should be closer and closer to the total turnover, right? Okay, now Chapter 8 and 9, looking at the P2P loans. Now, so this is again just looking at the amount of transaction volume happens in China, particularly looking at 2014 to 2015, right? And then there's also, I'm going to look at both this on volume together. Number of investment, number of borrower involved from 2014 to 2015, a big increase, right? Also 6 times. This is also almost less than 5, maybe 5 times. And we know the P2P has been around for many years as well, in US as well. Now in China, it just mushroomed in these 2 years. And then it slows down again. Why? Because I had a lot of problems, right? And then the regulation is shutting down many of them. So at the highest time, China alone have maybe over 2,000 of P2P platform. And in the surviving one, in the end, there's not going to be so many surviving. It's going to much less will be able to survive. Right? Just thinking about it, they are like the online service provider to brokerage loans and the lender and the borrowers for the loans, right? How much online brokerage you need for this? Right? And first the network need to be big enough so that you with your people. And you have to have sufficient borrower and lender to make that platform efficient. Did I told you guys about the network effect? Is an example of Microsoft and Macintosh, right? There's only 2. Maybe somebody still using Unix could be possible, but Unix and Macintosh is probably the matching ones. Why? Why can't we have more of those base networks provider? I think I told you about this example, right? It is a network. The network have to require the scale effect, right? You don't want it to be the difficulty of dealing with other people at different system. You want your file that you worked on the Microsoft, and most likely your team member using Microsoft as well. If you're using different network, it loses this convenience, right? So the nature of all those network-based service has the nature they have to consolidate with a few left in the end. So this is going to be, so many of the China's P2P, those platforms, sooner or later is going to be closed. They can't survive. The similar thing is like the bike rental, right? It just mushroomed with all those bike rental. Thinking about bike rental, it's a network, right? You pick up the bike here, you park at another place. You want the network to have many points, right? So it's more concentrated with all these users to 1 or 2 or 3 companies, the better the network is, right? So that's, again, that competition ends up, it was, people like to blame on cheating or etc. It's not true. It's the nature of the industry. They have to end up only a few survivors. Most of them will die out. Okay. Now, so this is amount, and then the number of the platform increased like crazy. So by 2015, the number of the platform goes to 2,500. Yes, here, it's here. I didn't make it the number up, right? And and so what else I can tell you about P2P? Then there's also crowdfunding. I don't think I have the graph of crowdfunding. Oh, I do have. Right, so I can just talk about crowdfunding later on. Now, if we refer to the P2P, to early informal financing, we talked again, right? And what is the advantage and disadvantage if you have to put this concept into this? You basically lack of the network, the information advantage, right? The monitoring advantage. But you do have the network advantage of access to more financing. So making it possible for you to raise a lot of money through a lot of individuals rather than have to go into the equity market, which is, as IPO is much higher standards, right? So a lot of small business couldn't do it. Or go through the bank. The bank are not willing to lend you the big amount of monies. Now, there is something called angel financing, venture capital. You guys hear before, right? Some of those projects, even the angel financing or venture capital, are not willing to lend, right? But they might get crowdfunding or P2P getting working. Now, one of the very good example of this is, I don't know whether you guys heard of this. How many of you guys know this ocean cleaning project? This young boy in which country? I forgot which country he's from. He's a European young boy. He started this. I think when he started he was 14. And then he basically he goes scuba diving, he sees all the plastic in the ocean, and he thinks he should be cleaning up, right? And nobody was paying attention. He was quite a genius since he was young anyway. He has all kinds of invention. And then he started this idea. He said, I'm going to invent, technology to cleaning up the ocean of those plastics. And then he was a high school kid. He even did a lot of projects starting in his high school. Then between his high school and go to university, he actually when he was still in high school, he gave a TED Talk. Do you guys know TED Talk, right? And his TED Talk just somehow went into, people didn't pay attention at the beginning, right? And then he tries to raise money because this is the invention he needs to do, right? He tried to raise money. He writes to many big corporations, venture capital, angel financing, etc. Nobody, according to him, nobody writes back, only one. And this guy tells him, stop dreaming, go to university, because he was going right. And so it was very unsuccessful. And in the end, how did he solve the problem? He went crowdfunding, online crowdfunding. And he immediately raised like 10 million in the first round or 20 million in the first round through crowdfunding, through thousands of people. Right? And then his TED Talk, because of the success of the crowdfunding, right, the TED Talk became popular. Then many people know about him. Then he was able to raise even more money. And now I think he quit university. He was doing this, and they recently launched they are testing the machine now. Some machines they put in the ocean, and automatically the currents carries them, picking up all the plastics. And now, but remember, if you're thinking business model, you guys are finance students, right? In this course, remember when we talk about the financial institutions, etc., talking about the business, what are the three things we're talking about? Where the income come from, right? Where is the expenses? And where is the risk? Now thinking about, since we're talking about this business, what do you think, where the income come from? He doesn't generate any income, right? Except raising money, which was shareholders or debt holders. That's a liability. He doesn't have income. What's the expenses? Research, development, employee, all this, right? So he has to create income in the long run. This is part of the reason maybe, first people thinking technology-wise, his idea is too crazy to happen. Second is people don't see how you're going to make income out of it, right? And then now he's working on how to make income. He basically, once they pick up all those plastics, he has to make income out of this. That's something, okay. So this is an example of the advantage of crowdfunding might actually overcome, right? You see this project. This is a project that clearly very risky, right? Don't have a clear income model. And technology-wise, very challenging, right? So people have very little trust. But what is the good thing? What is the sport about this idea? Many people believe cleaning the ocean. Many people believe this idea itself, right? So if through crowdfunding, the risk is diversified to many, many more people. They don't care about, because I believe this idea, and maybe some people just believe I want to encourage this young boy's dream. They don't mind to chip in 1,000, 2,000, right? Because this is relatively small risk. But if you want to go to the bank definitely says no, right? Even if you go to the venture capital, they will say no, because when the venture capital makes the investment, they make millions, right? It becomes they're taking too much risk. So the crowdfunding, this online platform, allows this super risk project to be diversified to many, many investors who actually care less about the return, who are more agree on the idealism. That makes those kind of things that you're thinking almost impossible to happen now happens, right? Okay, so this is the P2P, and this. Now, what's the P2P rate of return and the terms? So this is what his term is like how long the loan they are on the P2P, right? And the return comes back to basically the interest rate and also the default possibility. Now, the term of the loan, it's kind of, it started as a longer term, 7 months, but at a certain time declining in its 5 term, now back to 7 term. But basically, it's between 3 months to 6 months, right? They are short-term loans. The P2P are short-term loans, so it's for quick turnovers. Now, think again why. Think about the informal financing model I introduced you. Putting this, why is this short-term? Because of the risk, right? They have no information monitoring there. So they have to have the short-term. that for the platform can trace each fast. Now the rate of return, this is a part, interesting, right? Decrease. Early was better, around 20%, so the interest is high. Now you can see the interest rate is very high. And if you're thinking of the informal financing, why the interest rate is high? The collateral is harder to trace, right? It's very hard for them to monitor, monitoring cost, and also how much is the carrying, implicit carrying in it. The borrower don't know the lender don't know the borrower, right? And then just a broker in the middle who will also take fees, etc. Right? So there is not particularly who cares, the borrower and the lender. The only person cares maybe is the broker who wants to make sure this deals will go through one-on-one and taking fee, also maybe possibly to reduce the default rate. That's why, okay, so the interest rate is high. But then after 13, why it declines? Year 14, year 15, why it declines? If we go back here, you will understand why. Right? You have a lot of investment borrower comes in. At the beginning, it's those who have the best project gets selected. Right? Over the time, when there's more demand and more project and what's coming in, the less good the quality of the project is going to declining. So the return is going to decline. Right, so this makes sense. And the next one is type of crowdfunding platform. Now the crowdfunding, how should we say it? It's like P2P, individual coming together now, but difference with crowdfunding is you take more something like equity, but sometimes is like awards, right? So it's not a direct loan, then I return you the money with interest. That's the key difference here. Now the crowdfunding is basically they chip in some money, but what they're getting in return is either they can become the shareholder of the company, or they can get some service, right? Or they can getting some awards. Now the majority ones is the equity. That's the most one biggest components. And then they are this rewards based, and then there's a mix of rewards and equity, and some are just charity giving for free. Right. Now what is equity based, you guys understand. Just take the ownership of the company who are raised that money. And what are the rewards based? Rewards based is basically according to the amount you putting in, you will get a certain service or value back. Any of you guys knows like a famous companies that are funded on crowdfunding? Example? Okay, then if you guys don't, I give you an example. It's a coffee shop. Okay, it's a Peking University alumni coffee shop, right? And they actually have original one in Peking University, and now one in Shenzhen, and they are actually, I think, one in New York as well. What was the model is they can have 100 investors. This crowdfunding was limited to 100 people and have to be Peking U alumni. And then you can chip in, I think it was either 10,000 or 20,000. I don't know exactly the amount anymore. And so, but then you become sort of the VIP customer of the coffee shop, but this VIP is not just a title. They actually give you the value of the amount you can consume. And the value of the amount, I couldn't remember exactly, but I'm just giving a hypothetical number, maybe not too much off. I think if you give it to you as an investor, invest 10,000, you get 15,000 of the value you can consume. And so, because it's reward based, now you can see they attract the investors differently, right? They have to attract those investors who actually have this consumption needs, right? And that's why you're understanding this coffee shop has to be alumni. And they often is those business alumni. So then ends up this coffee shop don't worry about income either. They are at Peking University, they have the regular students, staff and other people as customer, but they also have a stable customer as those investors, right? Because the investors, they design the coffee shop in a way, they are meeting rooms, right? They also put coffee, there's lunch, etc. So then they can host the business meetings, right? And the initial investors who have this consumption value, they can use this to pay for the service they're getting from this coffee shop, right? So now it ends up, it's like a business club thing, right? Where you can get networking, you can get your service you needed, and your investor and rewards gets, flowing, transacted. Is it clear now? Okay. Okay, the Chinese equity crowdfunding volume. So this, again, volume is much bigger coming up. And it's crowdfunding market shares, the Jingdong, so that's probably the best example, right? Jingdong is crowdfunding. And then Cengcong and Taobao, this is also initial crowdfunding, but eventually they become listed. But that's where they initially started. Right. Okay, now, there is this one example of this about assets and number of assets. It's like or more an assets management company. This is different from Rufax, right? So this is, I think this is Taobao's, right? Is it Taobao's? Yubao? No? Alibaba's. Okay, Alibaba, yes. Right. So this is sort of the assets management business now, right? So this shows the total assets growing up and the number of customers goes up. And also this shows the rate of return you can have. 余额包 OK 我就翻译的 Chinese words 余额包是淘宝的余额包是阿里巴巴 Yes OK Right OK Right so basically how does this assets management was run? You have an account and you use this online payment exactly or you purchase, right? Then they have this 余额包 is basically if you enter this one, your year automatically goes into something like a money management money market fund.
Or like a money fund, right?
Yes, money market fund. And what is money market fund? Short term. Yes, short term, right? So that's why, because they have to do short term because of the, in and out, right? Your boss money getting used, people are using transaction, right? And so this is the large increase just within 2 or 3 years. But similarly, at the beginning that the interest rate was high, the return was high, over time it gets lower, right? And this is coming from the return on assets scales, right? Initial was much less money. They also need to attract customers, but over time it become large money market. The large money market need to find enough short-term instruments or assets to invest to make a return. Then the best one, which also give a lot of volume, is a treasury bond, right? Or certified deposit of the banks. That's why when you go longer, the interest rate has to decline. It has to go near to the base interest. Okay. Now the online insurance premium payment, and so the volume again goes really fast. It's all happening in China in the recent years after year 14, and the growth rate right goes up very high. Then the growth rate declining. the online insurance premium that in terms of the, why do I have these two here? Aren't they the same thing? Aren't they the same thing? What's the difference? They are the same thing. Why I repeat it? I think it's my mistake. They are the same graph. Yeah. So this is the online insurance premium. And we know why this will be considered. This is insurance is not just because it's online payment. It's not an online payment or premium, because the insurance company is a financial institution, remember, right? So the premium payment and the investment. So when you sort of paying your premium in the insurance, then your premium is pooled into certain funds the insurance company is going to invest. So that's, I think, it's more dimension of that. I think I stopped here. I didn't do anything on the Bitcoin or blockchain, right? Because blockchain, but I can tell you guys a little bit, the key challenging of the Bitcoin and blockchain. What do you guys know about this one? Maybe you guys can tell me first. What do you guys know about the key issue? The safety is probably the blockchain's most advantage, right? But even though it's still getting hacked once in a while. I don't want to go into the detail of why they are safe. We are not computer science course. What is challenging them? Yes, this is a regulation challenging, right? There's no guarantee of, nobody is guaranteed this is going to finally getting paid or transfer into anything material other than the online things that are accepted Bitcoins. Right? That is the key change. So Bitcoin is just one of those online money or e-money that are being developed through the blockchain technology nowadays. There are many of those. Bitcoin is just one of them. Okay. And then the other problem, other than the regulation issue, right? You're thinking about what's the money currency in our, remember we introduced the money, how it comes into being, right? The guarantee of the government behind it is very important, right? Somebody has to be essentially responsible to pay for this one in any case, right? And that's why in the old time it was gold, because gold can always store. They don't need to trust any particular government or institution. They trust the gold they can hold, right? And then the modern economy switched to the government provides the guarantee. Now the other technological challenge of everything involved blockchain is the slow transfer, right? Because of the security way of every transaction they created here has to be accordingly transacted, connected with the dots of the past. So it's very slow, right? And it's not, they cannot deal with the volume in the real life at all right now. So in the real banking, the internet, or the global transfer, every second they could transfer billions, no problem, right? But the blockchain would take a long, long time. If you have a billion transaction, maybe take the blockchain an hour and a day. I don't know exactly. I'm not so detailed on this one. I know the principle how it works. It will take a very long time for them to complete that transaction, right? Can you imagine of you click make payment, and then you're looking at the screen, processing for hours and for a day? So that's another technological challenge. That is the thing here. Now, when I say this, I'm not saying Bitcoin is a good investment or bad investment. I'm not make any recommendation. I'm just as a finance professor to tell you to looking at on a more comprehensive view. You know, it's so popular, it has its advantage, relatively safe, right? And it's also networked. Thinking about if everybody takes Bitcoin, we don't have these currency issues. We spend 2 classes talking about it, right? Or this current account payment, the overborrowing issues if your own currency is international currency. It will be exactly, remember we said as a solution. What was the solution? A common currency, right? A common currency is for international, not anybody's domestic. But Bitcoin could make an international currency. It's at the same time everybody's domestic currency. It will do exactly same work, even simpler, without exchange rate, right? It would all solve those currency issues. So it has an advantage as well, which why so even in the academics, even regulators, they are two very different camp. One camp wants to take the Bitcoin or something similar because of its nice feature of safety, get rid of the government, right? Get rid of all those currency issues. Those are the ones. Then there is other camp basically saying, how do you trust this is basically a network of, you have to trust the network everybody working, right? And also the speed issue. Okay, so that's basically I give you about the Bitcoin blockchain thing. Okay, there are many, Bitcoin just one of them. So I know in China, once something is hot, it becomes very hot. There are all kinds of weird conference and lectures and talk on Bitcoin and blockchain. Now, after what I tell you, you can judge whether those conferences was to go. Okay. And I think that's actually about it. We are finishing early again. And because as usual, I should be talking about the assignment report, but I'm honest, I haven't finished it yet. We have so many groups, so it's going to take a long time for me to finish. I will definitely have to finish by next Friday. Okay, so our plan is, so I'm going to finish early today. Our plan is next Friday, I will give you the report, right? And I will tell you a little bit discussing some general, give you feedback. Of course, every one of you gets every team gets individual feedback as well, but I also give you the general feedback and an overview. And then we do the final review. I will review what's the important key knowledge points. Then, of course, all these wouldn't take whole 3 hours. We will do Q&A. I'll stay here if there's many students ask questions, or I can move to the office to the Q&A. Okay? And the final time and the location is I already posted on the Wattle. And I think that's about now. If you want to see your midterm grade book today, 2 to 3 o'clock, from the classroom. Okay? Good.